Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll just give a couple of minutes for our colleagues to join in, but thank you for coming bang on time. Et comme d'habitude, si vous voulez écouter cet appel en français, il est disponible en cliquant sur la petite icône de globe en bas de votre écran.
Hi, everybody. We're just going to give colleagues a minute here to get online, and we will be getting started shortly. Thank you, Conte.
Like trickling in still. Ah ouais. So thank you all for joining us. We still have a few colleagues coming in, but we are going to get started in the interest of time. Comme d'habitude, si vous voulez écouter cet appel en français, vous pouvez le faire en cliquant sur le bouton Interprétation en bas de votre écran. And without further ado, we actually have quite a busy call today. At least we have a lot of things we wanted to talk about. So we wanted to touch on a number of places where global health has been on the global agenda. Some of these are coming a bit late because we had to cancel our call 2 weeks ago because of unforeseen sick leave across the team, but everyone is now recovered and ready to speak. So we'll quickly cover the Africa Forward Summit, which took place last month in Nairobi. We'll do a little bit of a hot takes from Geneva on the World Health Assembly. Then we'll hear our colleagues from GHA, Jan, to talk about the G7 and ways to engage ahead of the Evian Summit, which will be in France. We'll quickly cover the launch of the launch of a strategy meeting report. Our meeting took place 2 months ago in Nairobi. And finally, we'll give a quick reminder for those of you who were not able to join us yesterday that we have just launched a new strategy. And as usual, we're going to record this call and post it on our website in the next 2 days. I will now give it to Katie for a quick scene setting, sorry, on Africa Forward. Oh,
Which I find very funny because, in fact, I was not at Africa Forward, and I'm relying on Conte to give us a little bit of an update around it. And all of the things that you're about to hear me say is things that Conte has taught me. So, but the Africa Forward Summit, which took place, other than for those of you who didn't know, is something that used to be called the Africa France Summit, and there had been a previous one a few years ago. And I think it was a really interesting event that many of us have had some difficulty in understanding what the actual events would be and what the purpose and outcomes would be in terms of the discussions. However, because of where Conte is based in Nairobi, he was able to get into some of the different discussions and some of the different events that were taking place around it, and I think has some reflections for us around, both there was some success in terms of attendance, but global health wasn't really the focus. There were some minor announcements that were related, but most of the conversations were about sort of other kinds of other topics, like the ones noted at the bottom of the slide. So Conte, I'm going to pass it to you because I've been looking forward to this update and your reflections from the little bit of the event that you were able to attend. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Katie. And so the Africa Forward, so a little bit of background. This is something that people were talking about in the context of global health for about a year, especially since the US cuts were announced, because France presented itself, at least in the international scene, as wanting to take the lead on thinking ahead on how to approach global health in the future, yada, yada, yada. This format, Africa Forward, it's a new name for a long-going series of Africa France Summit. It used to be called France Afrique, but that was rebranded for obvious reasons because that had pretty dark roots in post-colonial French history. The last one of these summits was in 2021, and it was for the first time outside of Francophone Africa, which you can read as France trying to come out of its classical of its former colonies and expand across the continent. Or you can read as the fact that France is going through a number of bad moments across most of Francophone Africa. That's true in Algeria, that's true in the Sahel. And so it was the fact that we decided to move to Kenya was seen as an attempt to go somewhere more peaceful and more receptive to French interests. It was quite successful, as we said, in terms of attendance. There were a number of leaders who came. It was very high level, number of presidents. But global health was really not the focus. There were hopes ahead of a summit that it would take more of a space. But really, the core themes were cultural justice and France making a number of commitments to bring back to the continent things it has stolen during the colonial period, and private investments from Africa in France, from France towards Africa. There was some minor health announcement with some vaccine plans in South Africa and something around the global architecture, not directly health related, but to do with more seats on the UN Security Council going to Africa and an endorsement of this idea by Macron. So all in all, it was mostly a non-event from a global health perspective. I think it's important to flag because it was a good opportunity to talk with the Americans in the room, which have made a lot of global health discussions quite complicated and sensitive. But that opportunity wasn't taken because it seems that for both President Ruto of Kenya and President Macron of France, the objective was mostly to, they both are quite unpopular at home. They wanted to have a win on the international scene, and so they called in this meeting as a chance to grandstand. And neither of them had great things to announce when it comes to health, and so they went in different directions. That's kind of the end of it on Africa Forward. Katie, back to you.
Well, and really, we'll just open it up to all of you in case you have any questions or comments. And I do see a hand raised already by Jan. So I'll go to Jan first for a question or comment, and I'll invite other colleagues if you do have questions or comments for Conte to raise your hand or let us know in the chat or use the chat to make comments if you're not able to unmute. So Jan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. No, thank you very much, Quentin and Katie, for the presentation. I agree with everything you've shared. Just wanted to add that it was a great opportunity that we seized in order to influence in the margins of the summit. So the French government, the French president, and sensitizing French MPs. And thank you again for the members of Action Africa to have taken some time to meet with the French MPs that we brought with our delegation. I think it was a great asset to our delegation. And in terms of announcement, just wanted to flag another one that was announced on health and I think could be of interest for GFAN. UNITAID announced an agreement signed with the South African National AIDS Council and a US lab that I forgot the name of, but to launch the end-to-end production of lenacapavir in South Africa as soon as it will be, the plant will be ready, aligned with the announcement to make it available at a lower price starting in 2027. Over.
Thanks, Jan. I appreciate that. That's really helpful. And I remember I had seen that, some news around that. So look for the link to the lenacapavir end-to-end production in South Africa, I think, right? And share that as a link in the chat. I'm not seeing anybody else's hands raised or, there we go, perfect. Or, thank you, Jan, or any other comments to raise at this stage around Africa Forward. So I think we'll just move on in terms of our agenda. And the next kind of topic that we wanted to come back to was around the World Health Assembly, which took place a little bit more recently than Africa Forward. I think it was about 2 weeks ago now. It is something that personally I've never attended, the World Health Assembly. There's only so much one person can do in a year, or any of us can do in a year, to be clear. But it has always seemed like a really interesting and dynamic space, and a lot of conversation and a lot of events there. And this year, I know for us, what we were really watching was the conversations around the global health architecture reform. And in particular, obviously, there was the formal sort of adoption of a process for the WHO to host and convene discussions over the next year. And that was the area that we were most focused on in terms of GFAN. But of course, there was a number of other sort of key events that were being done by, both the Global Fund, but also Unitate and other partners in sort of the global health architecture reform space that we were watching. But this year, we did have somebody go to the World Health Assembly for the first time, which again was Conte. He's been busy hopping different events all over the place. So Conte, we just wanted to invite you for some of your reflections, and then we'll open it up to other colleagues for those of you who may have been there to share both any of the highlights that you had at WHA or any of the things that you came away with. I know personally I spent a little bit of time obsessing over the Spanish Prime Minister's speech and some of the ways in which he framed some of the conversations around global health, and watching some of those events virtually was really interesting. A little disappointed personally with the outcome from the WHA around the process, but not too surprised that it landed where it did. So Conte, what are some of your hot takes and reflections now that you're about 2 weeks out from it? Over to you.
I've mostly calmed down, so I'll be a bit more even-headed than I was after a week in Geneva. So yeah, thanks a lot, Katie. So I was just flagging that, and for those of you who attended World Health Assemblies before, you know this, but as we said, this was the first, in fact, for GFAN. And it's a very busy space, and part of the reason why GFAN typically does not attend is because HIV, TB, and malaria are typically not at the center of discussions. The WHO is just a really large beast that works on a lot of different things. And over the past few years, HIV, TB, malaria just haven't been at the center of discussion. But this time around, global health architecture reform was at the center of discussions, or at least part of the discussions, because the more I talk with people who attended, the more I realize that you can be both present in the same space and just attend very different events because it's just so large. So what I wanted to quickly touch on was two things with regard to the global health architecture reform. First, there was a vote on the launch of a WHO-hosted joint process. The idea is that the WHO is setting up a 25 members task force with the aim to make proposals for the next World Health Assembly that will be taken on or not by the that were taken on or not by the member states. What is fairly new with regard to that task force is that it's not entirely member states. So WHO is typically really member state driven. In that case, it's 25 member with 11 members that are coming from either the global health institution initiatives. So that includes Gavi, the Global Fund, CEPI, United, and the Pandemic Fund, as well as a representative, of course, of WHO, the Secretary, and a number of other UN entities. But there will be no civil society. And colleagues will put in the chat the statements from the HERE CSO consortium, which GFAN is a part of, around some of our thoughts around the fact that these discussions are happening without civil society. It's upsetting in particular because there was something that we were told ahead of time might happen, and we saw that being pulled back kind of a last minute. So it's frustrating at the same time, as Katie said, in the context of the WHO, it is very hard to get non-state actors involved at all. And so the fact that the process did have direct references to civil society involvement through the WHO civil society. I forget if it's an alliance, a consortium, or what they call it. But like they have a civil society engagement mechanism. And here CSO was also mentioned in a like somewhere hidden at the bottom of the page, but it was there. But what I want to highlight is that beyond that decision of WHO hosted joint process, there were very busy discussions around global health architecture reform. And what was obvious during the week was there really is a competition for influence across on who will get to set the tone of a discussion, to set the rules of a discussion when it comes to global health architecture reform. We have the Accra Reset, which is led by heads of state, mostly from the African continent, but not only. One key figure is the president of Ghana, President Mahama. There is the Lusaka agenda, which predates some of the more recent discussion on global health architecture reform and started immediately after the end of the COVID emergency, who used to be called the Future of Global Health Initiative. There's the Africa CDC Ministerial Committee that was launched a bit before WHO, and now there is the WHO hosted joint process. So what I think I want to highlight is that the discussions on global health architecture right now are an opportunity for various actors to build up a profile, to get a platform where we can largely grandstand and make very bold comments about the start of a new era, the new dawn, and things like that. We had some of the more political figures talking about global health architecture reform, talking of a new dawn, a new independence for the African continent in particular. But there really is, there's a number of core themes that are emerging, health sovereignty and sovereignty more generally. There's a rejection of dependency, it came back again and again, and a rejection of vertical initiatives. And that I think is particularly important in the context of HIV, TB, and malaria, where a lot of programs are funded through what I know Global Fund colleagues don't like to be called a vertical initiative, but in this context, that they were included in that category. A rejection of agenda setting in donor countries as well. But what was perhaps, I don't know how surprising it is, but there really was an alignment in what people said across donor countries and implementing countries. And I think that is a bit concerning to advocates, because if all countries on both sides of that line, donor and implementer, agree that implies that the stage is already set. People are already framing this discussion, and they're already agreed on how they want to frame it. And I think largely the way we frame it is not particularly helpful and is not leading us towards particularly positive reforms and solutions. What was a clear contrast was these very strong words, as I said, a lot of political grandstanding from a number of people, some of them political figures, but also some of them, on the technocratic side. But there really isn't clear plans coming out of any of these discussions, whether it's the Accra Reset, the Lusaka Agenda, the Africa CDC Ministerial Committee, the WHO hosted joint process. All of them for now don't really have a clear plan. In processes, some of them have at least some sort of calendar. That's the case for the WHO process. Others are really just, you want to mention the Accra Reset, for example, in your speech, because that lets you say something about sovereignty, but then what that actually means in practice isn't very clear. And in particular, the reason why these plans aren't very clear is that this really seems to be a gap between what implementers are, implementing governments in particular, seem to be saying. They are saying, does that work? Yeah, sorry. The implementing governments seem to say we want continuing funding so we can strengthen our health system, but we don't want the sort of strings attached that we see with current channels of funding. And donor governments say, well, actually, we think the way forward is no more funding because that only creates dependency. So we should just cut it. And there really isn't a clear middle ground across those two. And so how you can both, you can say the same things, mean very different things, and meet yourself in the middle is a bit unclear. And finally, there's the fact that while we talk about reform, the reforms are happening. They're happening in the form of the cuts across donor countries, of a change of policies in many of the GHIs. I'm thinking in particular of the accelerated transition of the Global Fund, or the way the US has announced unilaterally that it was going to end the use of chemonics, and now it was going to be one move that was going to do all of their procurement. And all of these decisions are being done completely unilateral. So governments are taking decisions, are implementing it completely outside of these different discussion channels and processes. So what was frustrating coming back, and I think something I want to warn us against as advocates, is that we should be careful not to simply repeat the way these discussions are being framed. We don't like when we don't have to say health sovereignty every time we want to talk about global health architecture reform. Sometimes there's a place for it, but sometimes when we do that, we might actually be just supporting agendas that are not in our interest, and more importantly, not in the interest of the people that we serve. And it felt a lot that across the meeting, a lot of people, including on the academic and including on the civil society side, were too willing to engage in this debate by agreeing with everything that was said before them. And in fact, I think on these discussions, we really should be willing to disagree at times strongly with some of the arguments and some of the solutions that are being pushed. In particular, I think, the idea that that money should come out of donor countries with no strings attached does pose a number of really silent issues. And on the other side, the fact that a number of donor governments are using the excuse of health sovereignty to just cut funding is also like a major issue. So both of these solutions are, I think, no-goes. But that's me starting to blabber on. And I'll give it back to Katie.
Thanks, Conte. I think it is really helpful to point out the ways in which different language is being used in different contexts. I did pop into the chat for everyone the statement that we were a part of as GFAN, as part of the Here CSO work that we do, noting Peter's comment in the chat as well, in terms of meaningful sort of integration being challenging, and something that came to the forefront for him at the WHA, including other spaces, I'm sure. And I see Angela with her hand raised, and I just wanted to invite other colleagues, if you did have any comments or anything that you wanted to query around that update from Conte, or around the Here CSO work that GFAN's been doing, now's the time to raise your hand. But first I'll go to Angela because she's already on that. So over to you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Kantan, for the information from my side. I think I will agree on what it was briefed to the colleagues, but mostly I think this is a space for us to reflect on how we're going to position communities and CSOs at the center of the discussion, because this was for me the most shocking part, that it was like very neglected, and there was no explicit even mention to community CSO participation or engagement, or even as programs being directed with the meaningful participation design process with CSOs and communities. And this, for example, the Accra Reset meeting was conducted at the Global Health Campus, also with the participation of the Global Fund representatives. And it was important for me to also ask this space on how we're going to approach not only the language, but the advocacy strategy that we can move forward to really position our agenda and our priorities within the HTM response, but also meaningfully engaging our participants and our constituencies differently. And besides the WHA being very competitive, there was also clear guidance and clear lack of how small we are, as Peter is saying in the chat, how small we really are in terms of all the integration. And some keywords I might also be warning us to keep on using, or using it differently with CSOs and civil society engagement, will be country ownership, integration, efficiency. So this kind of words were used most of the time with an idea that this should be government-led. So I'll stop there and probably hear also from other colleagues and reflect mostly on what are our plans and strategies to move forward and meaningfully include us more in the spaces within these agendas. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm glad. I think it ties back to a question that we received yesterday towards the end of our strategy launch call, which was sort of the narrative is shifting. And the language and how it's being used is shifting a little as well. And we do need to be careful because I heard you say sort of all of those terms as well. And I know exactly what you mean by, the challenges, country ownership has become synonymous with government ownership, and it doesn't actually include, sort of us or community system type, at least in the health space, that doesn't seem to be. So thank you for that. I think it was a good question yesterday, and I think it's one that we're grappling with, and I'm sure many of you are as well, in terms of how to align to the narrative so that you're heard and you're in the conversation, but not, accidentally or incidentally assume that you're meaning the same things as some of the people that you're speaking with, or that they think you mean the same thing as well. Any other reflections from colleagues who were there at WHA that they wanted to share, or any other resources you wanted to pop into the chat? I would welcome colleagues doing that as we go through the call. I know it was a very busy few weeks, but as with everything like this, it ends up being something that, you get back from and then you move on from. And sometimes it's hard to remember just 2 weeks later. But Peter, you have your hand raised, so I'll pass it to you. And if there's no other ones after your comments, Peter, then we will move on our agenda. But Peter, please go ahead.
Yes, just very, very briefly. So I attended some events that were hosted by civil society and some of our allies. But what I noticed is that in those events that the really critical questions were not raised, not by the audience and not by those who organized the event. So I just wonder how come and what sense does it make, and how serious are we taking ourselves when we sort of commit to do something in those spaces like the WHA. So I think this needs probably some more reflection, but this was my observation, and to be honest, I was not happy to see that. Thank you.
I don't know, Conte, if you have any reflections on that, having been there.
So I'm gonna assume here that Peter, you didn't mean to hear CSO events. I did feel like a lot of the questions there were raised, but generally that was what I found was really shocking across the discussions, is that it did not matter whether people on stage were government reps, were GHI representatives, were civil society people or academics. They were all pretending to say the same things. And what was odd at times is that you would have a panel where someone would say something really really shocking. There was a representative from the German government saying that he didn't think any organizations in global health besides WHO will still exist in 5 years. He would end his remarks on that tone, and then someone from civil society, I don't want to name the organization, but don't want to put people on the spot, would nod along and say yes, and we need to make sure that reforms are step by step and not too harsh. But you can't pretend that you're agreeing with what I just said, because you're saying things that are radically different. And there was that sense that no one wanted to address the fact that there were very different visions being articulated, and everyone always pretended to agree and were using the same words to mean completely different things. And to me, I really want to call out colleagues to say that we shouldn't pretend to agree with things that we shouldn't agree with. Some of the statements that were made were quite egregious. And that came from donor governments, that came from implementing governments. After one of the Accra Reset events, I was chatting with a colleague from a country who had a minister of health addressing the room, and I asked her what she thought of what was said, and she was like, it was all lies, and it's how we can't platform that kind of thing. And yeah, so it was I strongly agree with Peter that we need to be careful when engaging with discussions that they project a sense that everyone is agreeing, everyone is saying the same things, and we're all moving forward happily towards a better world, of a reformed health architecture, we actually mean completely different things for this reform. And the problem is that if you don't call out some of the more powerful actors that are trying to make some of these decisions, they're not going to make your vision. Like, it's not because you're agreeing with them that they're going to bring your vision. They're going to bring their vision to life, and yours is going to be flat.
And thank you, Conte. And I feel like Angela's put two other sort of topics in the chat in terms of where there were strong conversations around digital health, the use of AI, as well as access to innovations. And I suspect that comment applies to those as well, in terms of what we might talk to when we talk about access to innovations is probably different than what some other stakeholders do. The same with AI and digital health, although maybe there's a little bit more alignment around maybe some of the skeptical concerns, I guess, around AI in particular, maybe not digital health as much still, but anyways, very good. And I just see Molly McGovern has just popped her hand up. So I'm gonna pass it over to you, Molly, but then I will ask colleagues to put any further WHA reflections in the chat because we will move on our agenda. But Molly, please go ahead.
Sure, just a brief addition to say that of course, the U.S. government was not represented, and yet every conversation was reliant on the U.S. government funding continue to move, and hopeful that would move, despite so much critique and so much. We're not optimistic on much of that. So that was a really hard elephant in every room that went unaddressed. Just to piggyback on Peter's comment about big questions not being addressed. And so I'm also curious how Jeffrey Graham should be in attendance at the July Global Fund Board meeting. And so I'm curious how we as a group be planning to engage in advance to the July board meeting. And if there are any key issues that weren't addressed at WHA, especially with the U.S. government in the room, that are important to bring up and ask, that would be something to think about. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. And I think we will be coming back to those sort of discussions around the board meeting over the coming weeks, but it will be interesting to see who is there representing the U.S. It was Jeff in February, but there's been decisions to reduce the size of delegations, so reduce the number of people outside of sort of the board member and alternate board member and CFP that can attend. And so it will be interesting to see who is in attendance for many of the delegations, including the US, which had a rather large additional sets of people that were there. But I think flagging the sort of the fact that, while not there at those conversations, the role of the US continues to loom large over all of these World Health Assembly and other sort of global health architecture conversations, as well as financing conversations. So thank you for that flag. And we will come back to Global Fund Board meeting over the coming weeks. So we'll look forward to having you and others back on the call for that. I will just want to pass it on because as we said at the beginning, we are trying to hit a number of different things today. So apologies for sort of the rapid fire on this, but we are just a few weeks away from the G7 summit in France. And I'm going to pass it to our colleague Jan for his sort of, a little bit of an update around process and some of the likely outcomes in those areas around health, global fund, et cetera, that we're most looking ahead to, as well as sort of any updates around, I know there's various events in France over the coming 6 weeks related to Unitaid's 20th anniversary, which of course is very relevant. And just wondering if you also have reflections on that, Jan. But over to you for your G7 update and how it's going.
Thank you.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Katie. If you allow me, I'm going to also look back at the beginning of the French presidency to give I promise, short overview of what already happened, because it's to temper my mixed feelings about what to expect in 2 weeks from now in Evian, because we were starting from really low in terms of expectation for global health, and especially the global fund being covered during the French presidency of this year. G7 featuring health was really challenged by political authorities claiming that they wanted to streamline the G7 process, but also facing a expected tough positioning from the US, let's say. But despite that, a health ministerial working group was appointed and was able to keep working since the beginning of the year, rather at a technical level, although ministers of health gathered online several times. And so, yeah, this was positive in a sense that they didn't completely stop featuring health within that G7. Then there were some labeled events that were not the G7 per se, but that were under this label of the presidency. I'm not coming back to the Africa Forward Summit that we already covered, but a little before there was this One Health Summit in Lyon. I won't describe it too much, but one thing important to have in mind is that during that summit, France hosted a closed-door roundtable on the future of the global health architecture, and this allowed Peter Sands and Carol from Citel Plus, and that we all know, I'm sure, to be in the room and to defend the importance of maintaining the efficient instruments that we have at a time where people are trying to start from scratch or to scrap everything that was built over those past decades. So I think it was important. And at the end of this closed door roundtable, a declaration was adopted. Sorry, trying to copy the link. I will send that after. But it's highlighting the importance of having communities at the center of global health and its governance. So I think it was interesting to highlight. Then about a month ago, there was the development ministerial meeting. And in the official declaration, it's a lot about the evolution of the narrative on international solidarity, because the US didn't want the word solidarity to appear, so they found ways to circumvent this and talking about international partnership. Yeah, thank you, Katie. This is the statement. And on this, they're again repeating that it's important to leverage other sources of funding rather than traditional ODA in order to reach for the SDGs. But they're also saying that the most concessional financing sources, so the core ODA grants, should be more strongly focused on providing essential services to the most vulnerable. And here they mention health as a priority sector to channel more ODA. So it's interesting. And as an annex to the declaration, they also adopted what they call the health sovereignty financing framework. So we had a specific deliverable dedicated to health financing, which wasn't a given at all at the moment we started our advocacy. The content of it is quite poor, and we could be disappointed not to see the Global Fund mentioned. But since we heard what happened during the negotiations, France really pushed to have all the GHIs and especially the Global Fund and UNITED mentioned in the declaration. But since the US had a hard stop on Gavi and WHO, they decided to mention what they called in this document global health actors, in order not to point too strongly on the missing ones if they had to have a list. So yeah, it's disappointing, but you can trust it's not France fault. They have tried. And for Evian, and after that ministerial, we issued a reaction to this document that I'm going to share in the chat afterward. But basically, we were told that that was about it in terms of global health within the G7 process. The heads of state summit in between 10 days and 2 weeks from now in Evian might repeat some of what was adopted during the development ministerial declaration, and maybe again the health and other essential services focus that should be applied to ODA, but it won't go further. But then, because of the Ebola outbreak, things are shifting a little bit. And despite how dramatic the situation is in DRC and the Uganda border, we are but taking advantage of this in order to call on heads of state that will be in Evian to elevate the profile of health, addressing infectious diseases, strengthening health systems, and support of community health workers to respond to outbreaks, and also being there on the long run to better prepare for the upcoming ones. So we sent a letter to President Macron. Among our C7 Health Working Group, we shared a draft that we invite all partners to adapt to their own context and share with their respective governments. On top of the G7, we'll be invited in Lyon, Kenya, India, South Korea, and Brazil. So if you're based in these countries, or if you have partners based in those countries, I can share again the draft of the letter. It's prepared for the French president, but I think it can easily be adapted if you will to engage prior to Evian. And also on a side note, this and I'm finishing here. The G7 presidency also put France at the front of the international stage, and we used it for the advocacy toward France also itself, because as I'm sure you know, France slashed its ODA over the past years, and we were expecting even further cuts in 2026. Close to 600 million additional decrease were proposed by our Ministry of Finance last week, and at the highest level of the government. We don't know if it's the president himself or the prime minister, but this proposition was refused, and we should have maintained ODA for at least for now for the 2026 budget. So no additional cuts, which is at least something that we didn't have over the past years. Usually it's disproportionately affected when it comes to austerity. Stopping here and happy to answer questions.
I like that you're able to end on a well, at least it didn't get any worse in terms of that. So that's good. I think it's a really helpful overview in terms of how, the issue is sort of ebbing and flowing as, global developments do impact how these conversations take place. We've seen that before with things like G7 summits, and what happens in the month or two before can really impact that. I see Anna with her hand raised, so I do want to give her a chance to come in as well, and then invite colleagues who might have questions or other points that they wanted to raise to use the raise hand or comment in the chat, and we will get to that. But Anna, over to you.
Hello. Yes, I just wanted to add to the very complete briefing made by Jan that France is also planning the adoption of a head of states and government declaration on the fight against cancer, as well as a ministerial roadmap on this issue in Evian.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I'm not sure what precedent there is around that. It's kind of interesting as a topic, a very specific one in terms of cancer, but non-communicable diseases being a critical, critical issue as well within health conversations. Peter, over to you. And I'm looking for any other hands, not seeing any right now, but we'll give it a second. But Peter, please go ahead.
Yeah, Jan, thanks so much for your update. I did get the letter yesterday and today again, and I actually didn't understand what you want from us. So this is a letter to Macron. You just want us to sort of share the letter to Macron, to our representatives. So do you want to send us a letter to Macron as Germans, or do you want to send us a letter to our chancellor with the same content? This was not clear in the message, so sorry for coming up with this very stupid question.
No, so sorry if it wasn't clear from our messages. The letter to Macron was sent already, and we don't need other support. We already have his team acknowledging receipt, and we should be able to talk with them in the coming days. No, what we would like to see if for our partners, and if I take your example in Germany, to send to Macron's counterpart, so to Merz or to the minister that you would see appropriate. We could have wrote a letter directly to each G7 heads of state ourselves, but we think that you're you're more knowledgeable on what would resonate to your context these days in Germany, and same for our UK partners, and same for your Italian partners, and so on and so forth. So we shared with you the draft, the letter that we shared with Macron, in order for you to get inspired by it if you see fit within the timing, but then feel free to adapt it to your relevant context.
Thanks so much. Now I do understand, and sorry for the misunderstanding. I just didn't know what to do this morning, and I thought around and felt quite stupid. Thank you.
Sorry about that. We don't want to make you feel stupid.
Well, see, that's why we have GFAN calls, so we can clarify and find our path together. But no, that's really helpful. And Jan, thanks for flagging those letters. I know we're here to help get them out and about to people and help colleagues if they need a little bit of help to push that out the door, because the timeline, it is two weeks from now. It's 15th, 16th, I think, in terms of the summit itself. So the timeline in terms of getting things in is quite tight to make sure that it sort of makes its way up. But thank you so much for that update, Jan. I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I'm just double checking things here. Not seeing any other hands raised or anything else in the chat. So thank you again for the update. And I think that as there are, things that do come up, continue to use the listserv, continue to reach out to colleagues directly, continue to use us to help you in terms of getting the action and the whatever messages and things that you're hoping other colleagues can try and amplify in this last sort of lead up. But thank you, Jan, and others behind you doing all of this work, re the G7. So I will pass. Okay, sorry. So there's a funny thing happening where I can't actually see the slides today that have been updated since I last looked at them. And so every slide that's coming up is a really good surprise. And I really enjoy this picture of a colleague in the middle who was clearly having a lot of fun with some of our stickers and handouts at our GFAN strategy meeting. So that's why you saw my face go a little funny, but I enjoy being surprised by slides as much as the next person. I will pass it to my colleague Priyanka, who's going to give us all just a quick update from the strategy meeting that we held in Nairobi at the beginning of March. And there is a report and she'll tell you all about that. So Priyanka, over to you.
Thanks, Katie. There's a power cut here, so preserving a little bit of my laptop's battery and the connection bandwidth, so I'm off camera. Apologies for that. So as Katie said, early in March, we had our GFAN annual strategy meeting, and this time around we met in Nairobi. There were a lot of you who were in the room, and then there were a few of you who joined us online because of the disruptions that were caused by the Middle East conflict. The report is out now and available on our website. The QR code is available on the slide, and we'll also post a direct link. I just wanted to bring a few highlights to your attention. We would really like you to go into the report and take a look at the updates from our colleagues over at the Global Fund, specifically referring to the strategic shifts that they plan to move in accordance with for their messaging as they look at the next chapter beyond GC8 and what the future holds. There are also very interesting discussions that happened within the room around transition, integration, and sustainability, which are, of course, the three keywords that are on the top of all of our lists. So we do hope that you will go in and find those sections important. We were also joined by our colleagues over at the three delegations who brought in perspectives and their plans on what they hope for this coming year and also GC8 in general as a whole. We've tried to document those discussions and those points as well within the report. So a section on that is also available. Apart from that, we use these meetings as a tool to build our roadmap for the upcoming year. It is really the space for us to hear and meet with a lot of you to understand how we, as the Secretariat, can continue to bring value and what is the direction that you would like to see the network taking. So as we had expected, and also something that circles back in our strategy as well, which Katie will talk to in 2 minutes, we heard from a lot of you about engaging with new members and new voices, supporting CCMs with information and resources to be able to get them to make a case for the interventions that they think are priority interventions. So a step towards that has been, which a few of you might have clocked, our World Malaria Day toolkit and also our World TB Day toolkit, just to mention a few. So things like that are in the pipeline where we are hoping to not just decode, but also build the expertise within the network and be able to continue to be valuable for all of our members. A lot of other points that came forward were the anti-science agenda, and also a lot of you in the room and also on Zoom wanted to hear more about public financial management and understanding what it was, what it entails, and how it can be sort of used as a tool. So you must have clocked that we have already been doing a few webinars and special GFAN calls around the topic, and that's just one of the things that we are trying to bring to you when it comes to that particular topic of expertise, and more to come on that as well. So yeah, the report's online. Hope you get a chance to take a look at it. And as I said, this is really a springboard for us to be able to plan for the upcoming year. And it was really, really reassuring and also interesting to see that a lot of what was discussed in this room was already in line with our new GFAN strategy, the 2026-2030 GFAN strategy that we launched yesterday. Yay! It's great to know that the entire network, to a large extent, is thinking cohesively and is headed in the same asks and the same expertise. So over to you, Katie.
Thank you, Priyanka. I think that's a really helpful segue into speaking a little bit about our strategy. But just to say, please do please do check out that report. We know we can't bring everybody together in person. This is a large network of over 1,200 individuals now. But we do try our best to make sort of the topics and the ways that those things are discussed available to everyone. So that report does give you some insight into some of the conversations and some of the information that we learned, and how, for example, Peter Sands, who joined us virtually, there were members from the Secretariat in person, but how he responded to some of the questions and the themes that were raised by advocates when we had an opportunity to speak with him. So please do have a look at that, not just because it's pretty, which it is also pretty. But so, yeah, I think, the strategy meeting itself and our strategy launch yesterday are a good segue, because we spent a lot of time through last year speaking with all of you, many of you. There were surveys that were sent broadly. There were surveys that were sent very specifically. There was a number of different kinds of conversations that were led by two consultants who joined us to help us develop our new strategy. Our International Steering Committee, which is made up of all of, representatives from all of you as members of the network, really helped to sort of guide this process. And what we've come out with is a new strategy that hopefully doesn't just look like it has sort of new words to make new words make sense, but that really kind of brings up to date and really helps to put the kind of work that we do into context, both to make it clear what it is that we do as a secretariat, as GFAN, but then also what and how we're looking at sort of the issues and the context of today. 2025 was a super exciting year to be trying to plan for the next 5 years, when, the entire discussion in global health seemed to be about change and about reform. So trying to build a strategy at the same time as that is always fun. And I sort of made the point yesterday as well that the previous strategy that we were operating under for the previous 5 years had been had its first discussion in March of 2020. So we're used to that. And I think we were well served by that strategy. And I think we will be well served by this one, which evolve sort of the existing sort of 3 pillars that we had of connect, inform, and amplify into unity, expertise, and advocacy. And if you've been around for the last few years, you've heard us talk a lot more about these kinds of themes and using this type of language in particular about ensuring that when it comes to the expertise that is heard in the decision-making spaces, that expertise is coming, from the ground up, from those who, have that lived experience or that lived sort of reality that informs the work that they do. And that has been really important us to shift that, because I think collectively, or I can say at least as far as GFAN is concerned, a decade ago, we were talking about stories and voices, and those are still really critical. It is really critical to be able to tell a story about the work that you do and the impact that you have. But it's also really important to make sure that, as we were talking about around the WHA, is that we're using language that gets us sort of those entry points into those conversations, but that we are also clear about what they mean to us. And we do mean that colleagues who have the most experience with the diseases, with lived health challenge realities, are the ones who should be at the decision-making tables, because they bring expertise and not just their stories. And so you can see here, this is really just a very quick, this was just sort of one of the slides that we had for yesterday. Hopefully what you read here around our vision, around the work that we do, and the values that we have still make sense. You'll still see us doing a lot of the same work. You'll still see us doing these calls, which we hope you find useful. You'll still see us doing briefs and analyses. They should be in line with those things that you can read about from our meeting in March, because that's where we, one of the places we get a lot of information from all of you in terms of framing the work and our work plan. but you should also, you should also see ways in which we're trying to adjust a little. Through our conversations with many of you, we realize that there is work that we need to do to make sure that newer members or members who maybe come from different regions or populations or organizations that we don't have as many of you active within the network, that we need to be doing a better job to support you to continue to stay involved and to elevate the issues and the perspectives that you bring within the platform, so that we have sort of fewer under and unrepresented groups within the work and the conversations that guide our work. And you should also sort of see and hopefully sort of work to really focus us, continue to focus on the Global Fund, which remains the core of the work we do. But as we have these conversations to shape and shift whatever the new global health architecture evolves into or is reformed to, hopefully you see us moving into some of those spaces where we haven't had as much of a presence, in terms of information sharing or expertise within the network around, financing, other ways of financing, and some of these other sort of big picture kinds of macro trends that are impacting the core of the work we do, the Global Fund, but also other global health institutions and other sort of processes that affect them. So I don't know that I could possibly do justice to the, I think what is a really lovely new strategy. But hopefully I can say to close us off today that we do plan on actively using this strategy. We have been actively working to find ways in which to operationalize it already. And obviously, like everybody else with something that's a big, lovely idea, we have to do some work to secure resources to make sure that we can continue to do our work. But I feel like we have sort of what we need in this strategy to do that in the coming years. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who participated in this and invite all of you to go and check out our strategy documents that are now online. And it is the hour, so I'm going to stop speaking, but thank all of our speakers, Conte for his many reflections, Jan for your reflections, Anna, Ankala, Peter, others, Smalley, etc., who shared some of your reflections on some of the topics today. We seem to be a little call heavy this month, but I think it's just because it's a busy time. So we do have another, what we call an exceptional call, because it's outside of our usual bi-weekly calls. Next week, you have invitations in your inboxes talking about integration and innovation, but I think in the ways that most of you are thinking of it and wanting to talk about that in the context of GC8. We have our next regular call on June 17th currently planned. We'll be bringing more information around the Global Fund board meeting as well as IAS. We did circulate a bit of a sign up around IAS, so if you have seen that and haven't gotten back to us, please do that as soon as possible. And just thank you for being with us today, and head off to your next call, as I know I have to do and my colleagues probably have to do. But thank you so much for today. I appreciate all of the updates and all of the information sharing. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.